we don't want to outsource our critical thinking skills to AI. It's so powerful. That's part of the danger in them. Did a tester who didn't know how to automate get replaced by a tester who can? And the ownership of the test kind of shifts away from a human to an agent. Testing is about learning from the results. Don't blindly trust these models.
Hello everyone, and welcome to BrowserStack Talks, conversations that turn testing pain points into playbooks. I'm your host, David, and today we're on the topic that's on everyone's mind, artificial intelligence. But we're going to go beyond the hype, and we're going to get into the core of what that means for the future of our industry. Today, I'm joined by Keith. Everyone knows him. He's been around for a while. But Keith, can you introduce yourselves to all the viewers?
Sure. Thanks, David. It's my name's Keith Klain. I've been working in software testing and quality for over 20 years now, primarily in banking. I'm now a director of quality engineering at KPMG, and have just recently taken on the role of looking after how we want to test systems that incorporate AI into them.
Awesome. That's really cool. So I want to get started straight into it. One of the things that I've always liked, kind of seeing you around and hearing the things you talk about, is that I kind of feel like you and I are kindred spirits in that we like to be contrarian and we like to look at things with a skeptical eye. So when we're like you as a kind of, you're a director, you're kind of leading teams, you're things like that, you're looking at how people are doing their things. What is your biggest concern in the current AI and testing hype?
Well, as usual, my biggest concern working with clients or just kind of our general welfare is there's kind of unknown and unmitigated risks to your business or the general public. And I think that's coming at it and looking at things from that lens is usually where a starting place for me. And I've talked a lot about how organizations, their approach to testing can actually introduce risks to their business, whether that be about coverage or the way they're using tools. And, I think AI and, the specifics of what people mean by AI is important as well. That can just cloud that judgment or cloud your view of the risks to your business even more. And so I think, the other problem I have with the risk on this is that kind of as a testing community, we seem to kind of abdicated our role for being objective about this stuff and have just kind of dove in feet first and just, trying to drive the AI bus a little bit instead of being skeptical about where it's going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, and part of the problem with it, sorry to interrupt, is that, it's not really true like black box testing as a technique, and it's talked about a lot as it's a black box, but it's not really a black box. We just don't know what's going on. So you have to test it like one, but it is possible to know what's happening. And there's lots of changes in that ecosystem around prompts, data, the training data, that creates a real regressive problem for testing. I think words like non-deterministic are getting thrown around quite a bit because they sound great, but they're not exactly non-deterministic. We just don't and probably won't ever get access to the level of detail we would get from these algorithms if you're using publicly available models.
Yeah, definitely. And so there's a lot to unpack in there, and I loved your answer. One of the things that you said that I've seen quite a lot at like conferences, speaking to people doing this, is the kind of you said like QA seem to be driving a lot of the AI usage and things like that, and I think that's historically we've been a very conservative group. Always risk averse. Let me rephrase it that way, right? Because we're trying to make sure that, people see us as the last line of defense. They shouldn't, but they do. And then driving that forward. I think that's quite good. The only concern I've seen with some people, and it's a minority, definitely a minority, is that there's this weird, Simon Stewart calls it the dopamine-driven development model,
Like
right?
that.
Like it's like, I've got to use this because it makes me feel good, right?
Yeah.
And so, how do you kind of balance that with your teams to get them doing the right thing? You said like some of the tools can make you more like increase risk rather than remove it. How are you like? What are the actual frameworks that you're giving to your teams?
Well, there's a I think it's my general approach as well. So, like, having been in this business for a long time, as my beard keeps changing a different color every year, and it seems to be accelerating with our current, wave we're surfing of AI. Is that I feel very strongly that that's our role in the in the organization, our delivery function, and I've kind of run at crosshairs with a lot of the broader testing community and vendors for quite some time on that, because our job is objectivity, right? And so one of the things that we work on, and I try and drum into my teams, is that we don't want to outsource our critical thinking skills to AI. It's a tool. It's a very powerful tool. I think the tech is moving so fast underneath it. I try and focus on a more abstract layer and say, like, what's our approach to using this, and so that we're not making mistakes that will have longer term consequences for your business or for the testers for their career. So to not let's not let the decision making process around releases or changes be outsourced, or how we're approaching our task to AI. And in most instances, people are referring to generative AI in some case. So, at the end of the day, it's a tool. We should not be afraid of it. We should be embracing it and incorporating it into our toolbox like we would everything else. But at the end of the day, you have to understand its strengths and its limitations and how to put that in there. So looking at kind of like the constraints around it, and where it should sit in a delivery life cycle, is particularly when it comes to testing, because as you rightly pointed out, we're very frequently viewed as the backstop. We are the last line of defense, as you said, against that. So making sure we're clear-eyed, and you'll hear this a lot more these days as well, is instead of talking about kind of deterministic test results, they're more probabilities. And it reminds me a lot of when we were kind of testing algorithmic trading engines in the 90s and late 90s, where we were using kind of a spectrum of results, and quants would look at it, and it's the same kind of approach we took, that like there's only right-ish answers. And so your risk model of how you viewed testing, how you viewed your business, just became incredibly important, because, and also your release process. So you would do smaller batches, sandboxes, things like that, limited, amount of desks that it would go to. And I think I see a lot of that kind of thinking kind of coming back into, popular opinion again.
Yeah. Definitely. I think you phrased it this way, where you've called it, there's no value in AI without that subject matter expertise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're saying, is that you need to still be the subject matter expert in some form, right?
Yeah.
In testing, in your craft, things like that. The way I was speaking to a colleague a while back, and he phrased it is that AI is a force multiplier. If you don't have the underlying craft or the underlying knowledge, it's 0 times whatever AI can do, because you can't tell if it's doing the right thing or wrong thing. You're just going to follow it blindly. Right. And I think that goes back to your still apply the critical thinking. That's what testers are brilliant at, right? And where their creativity really shines is this, like, looking at the nitty gritty and just being super focused on these little things, and then allow AI to grow out of that.
Well, I think, to use just riff on Simon's analogy a little bit, is that you could compare it to the same effect like alcohol has on people, right? So, it's a personality intensifier. So if you're a nice person, and you have a bunch of alcohol, you nothing to really worry about. But if you're already kind of a jerk, the force multiplier is going to make the problem that much larger. And I think Yeah, I recently kind of wrote a piece about this because with all this, rethinking how we're doing things, it reminded me of some work I did when I was at uni, and around like what it means to know something, and this artist that I love, Hans Hoffman, wrote a whole thing about the search for the real in art, or he was painting specifically, and I wrote kind of riffed on that about the search for the real and quality and testing, and there's part of this that like the testing side of this is not about the procedures and the checking. And I think we've had 20 years of reducing testing to, green lights and making sure that checking if something worked has become the kind of primary currency we trade in software testing. And I think there's certain parts of the testing process that where you find really deep problems or with your business or with the software that are kind of intangible, and they relate to kind of what it means to be human, not to get too philosophical about it,
Yeah.
but that's where I think your expertise as a software tester comes in as well. And there's this mistaking running tests with testing, and that this kind of the AI fanboy mania of wanting to replace humans in all this. I'd hate to be related to some of these people, but like that's treating quality like it's a problem that can be solved. And quality, it's not complicated, which is a problem. It's complex. It's only managed. And I think that really that expertise on like how to design tests, what it means to be a subject matter in this is that's when you can
Yeah.
start to distinguish between kind of real results, hallucinations, and help navigate that kind of risk. But you can't outsource your critical thinking to
No.
an AI to do that. And so that's where I think being an expert tester and understanding, studying it, testing and learning about it is where that skill is going to be crucially important, in the coming years.
Yeah, definitely. I, I think it's also, I think there's a slight problem in the industry at the moment where people have been sold too much on the hype, and it's now negatively impacting the juniors coming into the industry because now there's fewer of them who can learn the craft that we learned, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
still really important. So building off of that, like, what are the common claims or inflated promises that you've heard of that you want people to be really wary of?
Yeah, so there's some obvious ones, like, and I think if anybody's telling you that, and I hate this phrase, but you hear it a lot. Oh, you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by a tester with AI. I think they don't understand testing or risk. And if people are making claims like that and you're going to hire these folks, I would double check their work and make sure that they really understand what doing a good testing job is. So this idea that you're not going to need testers anymore, or that the testing process is 100%, just like it's not 100% automatable, it's not going to be replaced 100%. But there's, what it reminds me of, David, is the kind of no code. Some vendors might want to cover their ears. The kind of no code, low code, autonomous testing stuff that has just been claims for 20 years plus of trying to get rid of humans, and that it's all, so some of these very boring claims have now just kind of been rehashed, like, and I actually did a little cursory glance. I'm going to read a couple of them. It's like 80% test coverage in 4 months. These are actual things I just was looking on the web before I joined. Reduce your testing time by 80%. Automate tests 10 times faster with AI, no code needed. These are just headlines on websites. 90% coverage with our AI test case generator agent. Whatever the hell that is. So there's all these, and again, this is all based on the kind of validity, rich metric problem of counting test cases, right? And if that's what you
Yeah.
actually, so there's some of those, but then the more interesting ones are like what I'm kind of shifting into just calling some of these folks are like lunatics, where there's no need for manual testing ever. Somebody was talking about their digital coworker, like their agents are digital coworkers, which that anthropomorphism of AI is a real psychosis that's becoming real. AI tests never hallucinate. And my favorite that I just saw today, and again, this was like for 5 minutes of just kind of surfing, testing vendors, was that AI creates a synthetic human brain, which obviously it doesn't. But those are, you don't got to dig too deeply into software testing has been a target-rich environment for unverifiable claims for as long as I've been in this business. So, a lot of it is just old wine and into new skins.
Yeah. So the one that you said there, testers won't be replaced, but they'll be replaced. They could be replaced with testers with AI. I've kind of phrased it that way, and I want to just because I think it'll be interesting to see how you interpret it. Is that like, for me, it's a case of testers learning a new tool, not necessarily we need to get rid of them, but it's more AI can be useful for what I call like busy work, right? Getting rid of the busy work, and there it's a force multiplier, like second to none, really. So like test cases, where you said you were talking about test cases, I can see that because they're bigger. It can extend my creativity. It doesn't change my creativity. It just extends it, going, oh, have you thought of this? But then some of the creativity, rightly you pointed out, can be hallucinations, right? But that's just because even OpenAI have said that there's no way of getting rid of hallucinations. It's there forever.
It's because, frankly,
it.
it's all kind. Sorry to interrupt, but it's all kind of a hallucination. So they're not generating new knowledge; they're repurposing things that are already there. So that's how those generative AI models work, which is why they need to be trained on loads and loads of data, and have tons and tons of compute so that they can actually generate that. So, in a way, depending on how you want to define the word hallucinate, it's everything they do is a hallucination, because it's, I don't like that word anyway to use this, because it implies an understanding or a presence in reality that they don't have. They're not a person who's hallucinating. It's a machine we're making do things. You know what I mean? Because people, there's a bias towards associating language with intelligence, that when you see that doing that, it's such a powerful attractor to feel like, oh, this thing's intelligent. It's sentient. It's, a person. It's so powerful that's why that's part of the danger in them, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with.
To answer your question though, because you were talking about the tester, I think we're in alignment on that. I agree. As I said earlier, it's a tool. We should not be afraid of tools. We should use tools. We should learn about that. I think there's a lot of question marks around what this market's going to even look like in a year's time. Think about how much it's changed, on what the tool set looks like. I see, I was just at a conference last week, and my two lenses I was trying to review with the vendors and what people were talking about is that, one, I don't want to count to infinity, and two, I don't
Sorry,
want
Keith,
to
your
test
camera's
it.
gone off.
Okay, hang on. Is that? I'll restart. Do you edit these later?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I'll restart my answer then. So I was just at a conference last week. It's telling me to stop gesturing with my hands, which, coming from Chicago, is incredibly difficult. So I'll try not to. So I was just at a conference last week, and the lenses that I was trying to look at the work through, people who were either talking or the vendors there, was that, one, I don't want to count to infinity, and two, I don't want to test the internet. And a lot of what I saw was basically, kind of small bites at the apple of trying to solve those two problems. And to your point around, small things it can do. It can help organize work. It can. I was reading a blog earlier about Spotify and their agents that they're deploying, and that made me think, like, a lot of stuff they were doing there seemed kind of sensible, and I was like, okay, and they looked like they were deploying it at the enterprise level as well. I'll have to send you the link to the blog post that they wrote about it. So yeah, some of that, yeah, I agree with. It's a tool, and so just like anything else, I think did a tester who didn't know how to automate get replaced by a tester who can. No, I think we kind of created a cottage industry of test engineers. So you can go broke predicting what this market's going to look like.
Definitely. The one thing that you said there, and I fully agree with, is that in a year's time, things are going to look very different and it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
So awesome. So kind of going on to, like, I'd like to do a slight change into kind of bringing AI into the human-centric world, because I think it's really important, because we've covered everything in the AI space. So we've gone from kind of the skepticism to let's see if there's practical applications that we can give to teams and make them brilliant, right? Like that is, for any leader, you're just wanting your teams to be successful and be amazing human beings, because all of them are, just in different ways, right? So what does it look like to have a tester-centric design when using AI tools, like in the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, the idea behind something being tester-centric, right, is that the tester's in control of the usage, the inputs, the test selection and design. Basically, you're giving a tester agency over those ideas and owning the execution, or in some instances, prodding an AI to do the execution for that. And I think there's going to be a challenge when you start talking about like autonomous test platforms. I know, people are deploying, looking like self-healing code agents, and so the agency and the ownership of the test kind of shifts away from a human to an agent. And I think, test selection and design, as well as kind of interpretation of the results, which is not what checking's about. Testing is about learning from the results, not just logging, and that's where that mistake of running tests for testing is important. And I think that should reside with the tester and the test team and get those ideas agreed with the business, which, as you deploy a kind of, even multimodal agent army to start testing and deploying code and self-healing, you're now adding another layer of abstraction between that business risk, the business, and the test team, who are kind of, working on their behalf. So it makes my nervous. The red light starts blinking a little bit of like, okay, are we spinning out of control here in terms of, or where does the control reside with who's ultimately making release decisions? Who's, and that's a good question. Maybe you would have a crack at it. Is that if in self-healing code and something goes wrong, I work in a lot of highly regulated industries. Ultimately, who had agency over that change? If you were audited, is it the person who created the agent and deployed it and it's now running on its own? Is it who is the person who owns the application? There's, I think, some questions to be asked around like who did what when it comes to time when things go wrong, which is part of my job as a tester to think about.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I came from testing. I went into development. I then spent a large part of my career
I'm sorry to hear
developer. I moved into developer productivity because I really liked the way humans look at problems, right? I see every bit of software is a puzzle to me, right? Like, and you solve it in different ways. The way I went into leadership is that I then noticed that like humans are puzzles themselves, right? And you solve them in different and wonderful ways. And you have to be creative and you have to be all these things. But the one thing that you said there was when you're doing it, you're kind of, are you adding risk? When you're deploying all these agents to do things. And the first thing that popped into my head is like, if you're deploying all these agents to do all these things, how are you getting meaningful feedback in a meaningful time frame? Right. That was the difference in how I saw that, what you said, right? Compared to and I was what? Because now you're adding complexity. You're right. Like that creates risk. But then you've also gone, all these things are doing things and they've spotted a mistake and then they're rerunning it and they're rerunning it and they're rerunning it. And you're like, how are you getting feedback, right? Like now we head into the world of the XKCD comic. Like, why aren't you two working compiling, right? Like,
Yes.
AI agents are running.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. And I think that's the current models that I'm seeing right now being talked about kind of remind me they echo of the kind of non-delivery of ROI from test automation to a certain extent for a long time with this kind of like automate everything, 90+% automated testings. You're inundated with data. The goal seems to be just having green lights across all of that, which is not, to me, not the goal, right? Is not to just have, all your tests pass. And I think the companies that are doing this kind of massive agent deployment scheme are going to find themselves in that same kind of situation of that lack of ROI and not understanding. I've reviewed hundreds of test automation frameworks with folks, and they don't understand the value of it. My first question is always, if we stop running this today, what bad thing would happen? And you do get a lot of like, I don't really know. I'm not exactly sure what the bad thing would be. So, I some of these things as well, I think have not been tried in the court of public opinion, particularly in a regular or from the legal system around agency. And if you read some of the regulatory, proposals or stuff that's enacted, agency is a big part of it. Who did what? Who told it to do what? Can you explain this? And that's a real thing that I think is sooner rather than later is going to have a consequence for people who are just kind of blindly deploying things.
Yeah. I'm hoping to have Jessica Mosley. Have you met Jessica before?
No, I haven't. No, I've met her. No.
Jessica is a QA director. I'm going to be recording with her soon, but she's more focused on the security side of things, and I'm going to be interested to have that type of conversation with her. I've been doing talks about like how MCPs are awesome until they're not, right? So model context protocol stuff, where like because a lot of it's just a PyPy package or an npm package that you just got to download off the internet and hope it's safe. Right. Yeah. And if that changes the agency of what the agent was doing, and you're like, there's so many scary things. And I think, and I don't work in a well-regulated industry, right? Like, obviously, I have my basic training in like SOC 2 and GDPR and things like that.
Sure,
and I'm like, I'm dangerous in that I can see all these things. And then I'm like, man, this is scary. But also, there's all these cool things.
Yes. And again, that's to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier, as a tester, that's your role in the organization is to provide some of that objectivity, to not be blinded by the shiny new thing, but to look at it skeptically. And that mindset, which has been drummed out of a lot of people, through, I think, certification, rent seeking and everything else, that has been drummed out of people what your role as a tester is. And it really is providing that objectivity, and not people need to be go on the new stuff. Let's figure out how we use it. But there's a balance between the two. And I think that the testers who get that now and have those skills are in they were never out of demand, but they're going to be even stronger demand now once they become conversant in the language of AI and understand these concepts and can translate them into what's going on right now.
Yeah, and I think testers have always been very good at being able to bridge multiple teams and multiple ideas, right? Like that has always been their superpower, to be able to go speak to like the business and then go, okay, cool. And walk over to a developer who's like, technical. And you're like, okay, cool. And then like, there's a bug.
Yeah. And for people listening to this, there's a great book that describes that exact thing in a kind of sociological context, which is called Rethinking Expertise by Harry Collins. And he talks about expertise on a continuum where, you've got kind of what he calls beer mat expertise, the guy from Cheers at the bar who knows a little bit about everything. And then you've got deep knowledge that are contributing to the science and advancing things. Yeah. Being able to be conversant in the language of an expertise without being an expert is kind of the superpower of a tester, as what you're talking about. And being able to kind of bridge those gaps has absolutely been a very employable skill for the best testers that I've seen.
Yeah. So I want to kind of go a little bit into one area that we've just been talking about, which is kind of how do you work with your teams to make sure that they don't introduce new vulnerabilities or biases, right? If it's pure AI that they're working with, particularly in the industry you're working in, because if how you solve it can easily be translated into areas that are not so well regulated.
First of all, using a little bit of safety language, it's impossible to ever ensure that you're not. Anytime you introduce a new system, you're changing an existing system, it always introduces new risks, and that always introduces vulnerabilities for, the context of this conversation, for bias or just general risks. And so, there's I think the jury's still out on some of this stuff in terms of the eval models that are out there. So it's something you have to it's almost, I think, going to become a monitoring business. And some folks are already sprinting towards that. So the way to, try and limit your exposure to that is to test for it. And there's another really good paper on this that I've been kind of reading and rereading to try and, cram it through my uranium depleted 25 plus year, skull. It's called The Pursuit of Fairness in AI Models, right? And so it talks about, part of it is understanding the domain, right? So it talks about like different types of bias, because there's bias in everything that has to do with AI. There's bias in the data. So there's going to be issues in the training data there's people like Tim Gibber who've written loads about this. Emily Bender have written fantastic books on this stuff. So the underpinnings of the data is biased. Then there's your own bias, which there's loads written, either people developing these systems or testing them themselves. And testers should always be cognizant of their own biases. And so you can try and test for that a little bit and understand. And the pairing is a great technique to use if you're exploring a system to try and, limit the exposure to some of those. Then there's the whole other world we talked about around, from the black box perspective, is model bias. And they're subject to all those other things, training data, human bias, but they create the kind of, algorithmic choices that are made by these models, which will be, seeped in all that already. So there's certain things you can do to try and test for those, right? So if it's like looking at, before prompt engineering, you can look at kind of sampling and see do the weightings versus, to ask the prompt multiple times. There's lots of common and public eval models around that. Then there's, a technique that's called adversarial learning, or kind of, the parameter tuning, for a model, but you won't necessarily get exposure to that whilst you're testing, if you were testing a system that's kind of using a public model or AI enabled. And then there's a whole other part of this that you can look at, and it's which is basically post processing, which is things like the decision monitoring. You can look at explainable AI. There's lots of stuff being written and used on that, and there's a lot of these are concepts from sometimes 20 years ago, or on how to detect bias within machine learning algorithms. So it's complicated, and I think the problem we're having right now is that the scale at which this stuff is getting deployed, and the width, the breadth and depth of the scale is off charts. So people are plugging this into everything without really understanding how to test for those, and it's not simple. Which I think part of my point earlier is that it's important to have kind of principles and ethics before you start, so that you know what you're building towards, and you've got kind of a moral and ethical compass that you're either organizationally, personally, or as a team that you're pointed at. So that's those are some techniques there. But my kind of primary advice to people right now is when they're talking about how do we test for this stuff, for bias, for drift. I've seen people run 30, 40,000 iterations of the same test, and only after at 40,001 did they start to detect some drift. Right. So they're expensive, the scale's off the charts, and they're very complex models. So this is going to sound counterintuitive, but a lot of what I told was like, slow down. It's impossible to keep up with the tech right now, and it's changing so rapidly. It's like a perfect example was, I think it was this week I was reading in the Wall Street Journal about OpenAI is now on red alert because of Google is eating their lunch. Whereas what was a year ago, Google had red alert because of ChatGPT. And so these are crazy, valuations that are going on, crazy money being thrown at this. The tech's changing rapidly. I'm waiting to see what Apple does, really, in kind of anger with all this, with all the data they have, and access to. And they're a cash rich kind of sleeping giant on a little of this. So focus on your kind of frameworks first, implementing, some principles, some guardrails, where you don't want to go before just diving straight into the tech. And, like even, the CEO of Alphabet was talking about, don't blindly trust these models, right? There's things to test for. So just assuming it's going to work or that it's right is not a great idea.
Yeah, definitely. Just for clarification, one of the things I want to just mention to people, if they because it's not a term that gets used quite often, is AI drift. You mentioned it quite a lot, and the explanation I know of it, and you can tell me how correct I am, is that like when you've got a model, and say that it's a model around sport, right? And the sport goes, well, there's a ball, there's two nets, it must be football, right? And then you keep asking questions, keep doing things like this, and then over time, I grew up in South Africa, so rugby is like the sport that I quite like. For those in the US, it's kind of like American football, but without all the padding and things like that. And so as you keep asking the model for questions, it goes, well, there's a ball, there's two areas to score in, and they're very tall now. And the ball's no longer a circle; it's kind of oblong, like a rugby ball or American football. And that's what drift is, like the kind of the way the model. It's still technically correct for like what it's thinking because it's still a ball. It's an area where you've got to score, things like that. And there's like two areas where there's like metal poles, but it's definitely not in the right game anymore. Is that your understanding of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's multiple flavors of that. You can have just like if you're asking for an answer, how is it the consistency metrics within the answer that it's giving? Is it giving you the same answer again and again and again? And sometimes depending if you're deploying a small language model or you have a kind of RAG database where you're pointing it at, even a public available model, you can put in guardrails to try and control that. So there's the correctness or consistency, and then there's things that can drift into bias that we talked about earlier. You can, so those are all things that you can try. They're difficult at scale to try and to test for. And so that again is, I think that that's going to lead to a more monitoring approach, a kind of ongoing checking of that, is where I see that going. But yeah, I would agree with your definition.
Awesome. Right. We've come towards the end. We have a quick fire round. So the quick fire round is mostly because I like to waffle, and this is a good way to stop me from waffling. And so the idea is like, I ask you a question, you give me a very pointed answer, I move on to the next question. So, are you ready?
I'm ready. Fire away.
What's the one thing you believe the software testing community needs right now?
Ethical leadership.
Good. A book every QA leader should read?
Secrets of Success by Jerry Weinberg.
Oh, I like that book. Most underrated skill for a modern tester?
Modeling and communicating risk.
One piece of advice for a new tester starting their career?
Study and practice testing.
Nice. Besides testing, what is your, like, if you went to a tester or in tech space, what would you be doing today?
Probably something creative, music or art.
Nice. I like that. It's different from the usual farming.
People in tech think they want to go into farming, and then when you actually like be around farmers, there's no way anybody I know in tech is going to actually go farm.
Yeah. One word that describes the future of testing.
Paramount.
Oh, good word. Right. Keith, this has been incredibly insightful. I've really enjoyed having a chat with you. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your valuable principled perspective on this critical topic. To our listeners, if you want to learn more from you, where can they find you?
I am on LinkedIn. I have my own blog called qualityremarks.com. And you can also find me on the KPMG website. And this is, we're having a lot of active discussions with clients right now. So please reach out, and we'd love to talk to you about what you're doing in this space.
Amazing. And so for everyone who's watching, make sure that you hit the kind of subscribe, follow button, depending on the platform you're on, so you can hear when the next episode comes out. Keith, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, David. I really had a great time, and happy to be back anytime you want to continue this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.